Hey guys, welcome back. I've got 6 new cards to show you for today, starting with Druid. This one's called Spirit of the Raptor, so it is a spirit card for Druid. It costs 1 mana, 0 attack and 3 health like we've seen before. It also has stealth for 1 turn like the other spirits. After you kill a minion with your hero, draw a card. Now, I don't think this card's very good. I'm going to reserve saying that it's bad until we've seen the Druid lower card. Potentially the lower might synergize with this and make it worthwhile, but at the moment I really don't think it's very good. It requires you to deal damage with your hero power and kill a minion. So Druid's standard hero power does 1 damage and gains 1 armor, which can be very useful in certain situations. Yes, you can kill early game minions with it, so if you manage to play the spirit on turn 1, then on turn 2 you can hero power potentially a 1 health minion and then draw a card, which is quite nice, but not always what Druid really wants to do. There are other cards that synergize with it. There's Bite, Claw and Gnash. Those cards never really get seen play in Druid. This is a reason to play them, but is it that great? I don't really know. I don't think so. It's just a way to limit your opponent's board. Quite defensive cards, but not that great, and you have to have the spirit on the board to make that work. The spirit only costs 1 mana, which is great, because that means that you could quite easily squeeze a hero power in on the same turn. If of course you've got Malfurion out, your hero power can deal 3 damage before you upgrade it with the other cards I mentioned, so there is potential to make it work. We also saw the new card Savage Striker, which deals damage equal to your hero's attack. So again, that's another card that synergizes in here, but not one that I think is strong enough. Outside trying to build a deck like that, I think maybe a Token Druid might like this, because in Token Druid it's quite good to be able to put a stealth minion with a lot of health that you can buff quite easily, with the added bonus of being able to draw cards potentially, because drawing cards in Token Druid's quite important because you want to put minions on the board and you want to be able to buff them. You want to draw those cards to buff them. So it could potentially work there, but it's also kind of counterintuitive in the fact that if you're spending 2 mana on your hero power, then you're not playing a token onto the board, so you're not growing your board, which fits with that strategy. So I don't really see it being much of an issue in that deck either. The other thing to note is that if you're going to make it work, you want to draw more than 1 card with it, because if you're only drawing 1 card when you put this down, you may as well put that 1 extra card in your deck rather than using this one, because I don't think it has many uses outside of that. I'm kind of thinking, because we haven't seen the lower and we haven't seen many Druid cards, maybe there'll be a card that lets your hero power attack multiple enemies, and in which case that would be really good, because if you could put this on the board and kill 3 or 4 minions with your 1 attack on your hero power, potentially you can draw 4 cards, and that's really cool. Maybe we'll see something like that, but at the moment this doesn't seem that great to me. Speaking of bad cards, next up we've got Grifter, which is a neutral legendary minion, costs 4 mana, 4 attack and 5 health, so the stats are quite nice, but the battle cry is discover 2 cards, give 1 to your opponent at random. So if this card was a 4 mana 4/5 legendary battle cry discover a card, then I think it would go into lots and lots of decks. It's a great card to play that and discover a card. But the problem is you discover 2 cards. I'm not entirely sure how that will work, whether you discover, you get shown 3 cards and you pick 2 of them, or whether you get shown 3 cards, pick 1, then 3 cards again and pick another. The second scenario would be better. But once you've discovered those 2 cards, it randomly gives 1 of the 2 to your opponent. So that's not great. It's never good to give your opponent a card. Yes, you could discover potentially terrible cards to go into your opponent's hand, cards like ones that work against the synergies of their deck, but the problem is once you've selected them, you don't get to select which one your opponent gets, so you might end up getting that. So you could pick 2 good cards and then you get 1 good one, they get 1 good one. You could pick 2 bad cards, in which case why would you bother? The only instance where I see this is reasonably good is in a mill deck, because you're adding a card to your opponent's hand and then you can try and mill them from their actual cards in their deck. So that is one positive of doing it. There's the Druid card called Forest Guide, which draws 1 card at the end of the turn for each player, so that's also a bad card I think, but it could fit into that kind of deck. Another thing you could do potentially if you were trying to mill them is pick 2 high cost minions, put a high cost minion into their hand, which they'll find quite difficult to get rid of. That could work quite well in a mill deck, but outside of that I don't really see too many good uses for this card. It'll be fun to play with, I think it will be fun, but not one that's competitive. Right now anyway, maybe we'll see some synergy cards, but I think it needs a few. Next up is Arcanosaur. It's not a dragon, unfortunately. I was looking at the teaser art for this. I thought it would be a dragon, but it's not. It's an elemental. It's a mage card. It costs 6 mana, has 3 attack and 3 health, and it has the battle cry. If you played an elemental last turn, deal 3 damage to all other minions. This card I also don't think is very good. Now, the only deck you would really put this into is an elemental mage. It's not the sort of card you could put into any mage deck because you need to play the elemental the turn before. I think if you're playing an elemental deck, this would be really easy to activate. So you can compare it to a Dustbreaker, which is the priest card that does 3 damage to all minions, but that one needs a dragon in your hand. So Arcanosaur is harder to activate, easier to activate, I would say, because you usually have more elementals in than you do dragons in the Dragon Priest deck. But the problem is this one costs 6 and Dustbreaker costs 4. So you can't play it too much later in the game. Dustbreaker can play early game to help you. Other issues that I see with this is I don't really think it goes well into an elemental mage deck. So one of the key issues with elemental mage is when you fall behind or you lose the board, it's very difficult to catch up because you're mostly just playing minions. So this theoretically goes quite well in there because if you're behind on the board, you play this and then potentially you can catch up. But because it costs 6 mana, when you play it on turn 6, that 3 damage might not kill all the minions on your opponent's board, and you've only got up to 4 mana left to play alongside it, so it's not a huge tempo swing when you can play this and another minion with it. Also, if the game's going well, your game plan is going well with Elemental Mage, you've got minions on the board and you're gaining more power that way, so you don't want to play this because it kills your own minions. So I can't really see this being too good, to be honest. One key thing to note is when you've got Frostlich Jaina, it is potentially a way to heal up to full health again because it's an elemental. When you deal 3 damage to all the minions on the board, all of that damage will add up to heal your hero. So it's a bit like Baron-Geddon in that respect. AoE would be important in an elemental mage deck. The fact that this is elemental is great, but I don't think it deals enough damage, and I also don't. I think the fact that it hurts your own minions is also the downside for this. So not one that I think would go into elemental mage, unfortunately, and because it doesn't go in there, I don't think it will really go in anywhere. Next up is the Faraki Battle Axe. This card again, I don't think it's very strong. There's a bit of a theme with some of the cards from today. It's a weapon that's 5 mana 3/3. So initially I also think it's a little bit expensive for a 5 mana 3/3 weapon. But it has Overkill of give a minion in your hand +2/+2. So the effect's quite nice, and if you can get this to go off 3 times, then I think the mana cost is probably worth it. But the worth it is actually very slow. It's a slow play because 1, the weapon costs 5 mana, and 2, it buffs a minion in your hand that you probably can't play until the next turn. So it is quite a slow play. But the problem is it only buffs minions if it gets Overkill. So that's quite difficult to do because it only has 3 attack. Yes, you can make efficient trades and make this work, but are you going to be able to make it work consistently? The other problem is that since Mean Streets of Gadgetzan rotated out, Paladin lost pretty much all of its buff cards. It does have the Glowtron Technician, which is another buff card that you can play and give your minions +2/+2. So that would synergize, but I don't think it's really great. I don't think it really works. I also think Valinir is just a better option at 6 mana to put into this kind of deck. And unless Paladin sees a lot more buff cards, I don't see why you would actually play this. It's 5 mana. I don't think Odd Paladin would want to play it. It could potentially work, but it's just a bit slow for them. So not a great card right now for me, maybe one for the future. But even then, it's going to be quite difficult to make it work. Next up we have a pretty good Shaman card. This one's called Totemic Smash. It's a spell. So of course all spells you have to remember we could potentially discover from Hagatha the Witch as well, so it goes into that pool. But what it does is it deals 2 damage for 1 mana, and it also has Overkill, summon a basic totem. So this is a pretty good Overkill card, because even if you don't get the Overkill to activate, the 1 mana deal 2 damage is pretty good. In certain situations it can be great, but when you combine it with spell damage, so with Malygos on the board, suddenly this becomes deal 7 damage, and it's not to a minion, you can do it to face as well, so it could be one of these burst Malygos decks for Shaman potentially. So it's a pretty good card. Will you play it or not? I think it could work quite well in a token Shaman deck, because if you manage to use the Overkill, then you do summon a totem, which is quite nice to evolve, quite nice to use with Bloodlust, those kind of cards. So it could be pretty good. I think on its own it's pretty nice, but it does need to kind of go into a deck that's kind of built with spell damage. Otherwise, potentially you could put it into a control Shaman deck, which I don't really think exists right now. But a nice card. I think that the stats of it are good for a 1 mana spell. And finally for today, and probably the best card of today, but unfortunately one which Zoo might quite like, and this is called Grim Rally. It's a 1 mana rare spell, and what it does is destroy a friendly minion and give your other minions +1/+1. So I think this card is very strong. It can go into Zoo, which seems a bit strange, because Zoo, you're wanting to put minions on the board, you don't really want to kill your own minions. But in this instance, it kind of works as burst damage. So let's say you've got 4 minions on the board, you can attack with one of your lowest attack minion, you attack your opponent's face, then you kill it with Grim Rally, your other minions get +1/+1, and then that's 3 burst damage. Obviously more burst damage the more other minions you have on the board that you can do to your opponent's face. So, and you can also play 2 of these in 1 turn, so you could repeat the process. So it does have some pretty good implications in Zoo. Does Zoo want to add more spells? I don't know, because the current Zoo deck is pretty good in terms of the burst damage it can do and the amount of minions it can put on the board to swarm your opponent. Maybe this is one that you could put in to take out Soulfire, because Soulfire is 1 mana deal 4 damage. Soulfire is probably more consistent because you can direct that damage for every single time, but Grim Rally kind of plays into Zoo, because you can make your minions even more sticky than they already are, which is really frustrating for your opponent. So maybe it would go in there. It also kind of works with Herik the Bat, which was the legendary lower for Warlock, because when you look at Herik the Bat, you kind of think, well, you need to buff this in your hand, because then when you play it, you summon more copies of that minion. But actually, you can play Herik onto the board, kill one of the 1/1s, and then suddenly everything else becomes 2/2s. And if you've buffed Herik even more, then of course it just gives +1/+1 to those. You could even play Grim Rally twice with Herik the Bat and kill 2 of the 1/1s and make everything else 3/3s. So that is another good kind of way to use this card. And just like Dark Pact, it's another good positive way to destroy one of your own minions. Zoo doesn't really have any Death Rattle minions at the moment that would want to synergize with Grim Rally, but other other Warlock decks potentially might want to use it to kill their Death Rattles with Possessed Lackey, that kind of thing. I see less of a use of it in that kind of deck. I think you would still play Dark Pact over this card in those decks, but maybe that's a possibility. But another good Warlock card for the Zoo deck. Alright guys, that's all the cards I've got to show you for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments what you think about the cards, and I'll see you in the next video.